All right. Howdy, folks. I think we're coming at you, and hopefully it's loud and clear. Today, I want to talk to you about knowledge skills and handling them as a game master at your tabletop, and growing as a game master as far as how you handle them. We all have occasions where we feel like we could have done better with something, where we discover a new nuance to the way that we are running things or the way we could be. We see opportunities to grow as a game master so that the sessions that we're running and the campaigns that we are responsible for and facilitating are something which is closer to what we want. In other words, while there are so many voices out there in the world that will tell you that there's no one way to be a great game master, or there's some other voices that will say you've always got to focus on if everybody's having fun, and that otherwise, nothing else matters. I'm not one to throw in for either of those. I think that we can get better. And that's my point of view. And I want to talk to you about my journey into getting better and some of the questions that I've asked myself and the roads that I've walked when it comes to game mastering of tabletop RPGs, knowledge skills, and generally handling any particular skill and how skill checks arise, when to tell people to roll the dice, what to set the difficulty as, and that sort of thing is it's definitely it's one of the places where there's a lot to be learned. It's one of the places where when you're first starting, you certainly feel not so sure of what you know, and whether you know is in fact true knowledge, or if you're just guessing. So I put this up on the screen because this is a very pop culture meditation on epistemology. This song, which for content ID reasons, I'm not gonna. I may try and sing some verses of it a little later as we get deeper into this, and maybe as my verve starts to rev up as a streamer. But suffice it to say, what I know is what I know, or sorry, what I am is what I am. You what you are, or what? It's a meditation on questions of how do you know things, and of course the classic, Immanuel Kant is a philosopher who says you know things because you've observed them. How do you know that you know how to do something? Well, it's because you've observed, you've seen it. How do you know that you know a lot about something? You know a lot of trivia, you know a lot of facts. It's because, you've verified and cultivated that knowledge with other people, and you kind of keep checking, like, am I really up to date? Am I an authority on this topic? And you check if your knowledge matches that of other people. You check if your knowledge was helpful to those other people. And I'm getting someplace with this. So let's get down to the tabletop. Let's get down to the actual thinking about this, okay? Let's talk about some best practices. We got to put on our reading glasses now. So whenever a character is trying to attempt a skill, whenever a character is doing a thing in the world, my preference as far as how I play is that, and how I like to see characters play at my table is I like for people to, oh my, look at me, I'm out of frame. First of all, so one thing that I don't know that well is how to set up a multi-camera stream show yet. I'm still working on it, folks, but I hope you're enjoying the ride. Okay, so the way that I like to run things as a GM is I like the players to describe the actions of their characters, and that from that, as challenging situations arise or as questions which sort of nobody knows the answer to, because I try to be a neutral vessel for the world, a channel that the world comes through by. Well, when a question of like, does my character know this? That might be a challenging question, right? Well, then we might say, okay, it's time to roll the dice. That's how die rolls and tests of knowledge arise at my tabletop. That's my best practice, if you will. And from there, the questions of how the character starts to do the thing and actually work on that is that's the tools of their trade. That is their skill. So what I mean by that is that if a character is knowledgeable, if they spent points in a knowledge skill, if they're trying to guess how to be knowledgeable, if they they learned a thing once, they heard from a guy once, they're making a default roll. What do they do to access that knowledge? And I say that because I think you take it for granted. I think most folks take it for granted that, when a character is doing something, a skill like, say, climbing, like athletics, like stealth, a dude who's good at sneaking, a sneaky guy, is practiced in sliding his feet along the floor and being extra quiet, right? That's his deal. And likewise, a guy who's good at climbing, he knows how to stretch out his fingers. He knows how to have 3 handholds in place at a given time as he goes up a cliffside, right? He knows some things about how to do it that the player might not. And likewise, there's kind of an image of someone who's got skills, right? So with knowledge skills, there's no image really. The person is trying to recall something, right? Well, not exactly. And that's sort of a challenge that I want to put to you. That's a thing in the world of game mastering that I've grown. So this is the first thing that I want to point out to you is that, so what is a skill check in the given RPG that you're playing? Okay? Like, well, what does it mean for a test of skill to be happening? In most modern RPGs, that means that the character and the player, by way of the character, has an intent that they want to achieve. And that intent is achievable within the scope of the situation, within the scope of their capabilities, but it might be challenging. It might be difficult. And so they've got to roll the dice, right? And we're invoking that. So it's to achieve an intent. I want to bring my knowledge to bear on this situation to do something. And it's not just do I remember something, it's do I remember something relevant? Do I recall something that can solve our problem? Do I know something about the USS Reliant? Do I know that Pavel Chekhov is the first officer and that he used to serve aboard the Enterprise as a young helmsman? That his career has been a big part of his life, and he's really trying to move up through Starfleet by being an eager believer. That is definitely going to give me some advantages if I hail the USS Reliant as the captain of a Klingon warbird, perhaps, and the image of Pavel Chekhov comes on the screen. I've got some useful information now about how to approach that conversation. I can appeal to his careerism. I can appeal to his loyalty to his friends and to his mentor, Captain James Kirk. And I can say, well, what would James Kirk do in this situation? And are you really following in his footsteps? Can you better him? I have access to new ways to weigh upon Pavel Chekhov because I maybe have knowledge of Starfleet personnel, for example, or knowledge of galactic events, since the Enterprise in its original run, often had some important roles in events within the Alpha Quadrant. That's just an example, okay? Suffice it to say, when a knowledge skill is brought to bear, there's usually an intent that the character and the player have to realize. It's not just like, hey, do I remember anything? And then the GM says, oh yeah, you remember this list of stuff. Do you do it that way? Because that's the way I did it for the longest time. So there you go. That's number one, is to ask yourself, how do skill rolls arise in a given game? Should knowledge skills be any different than the other skills in the game, as far as, I want to do a thing, and then the GM says, well, that's going to be a little challenging, and then you find yourself doing it, right? And then next you are rolling the dice to see if you did it, informed by your skills. Okay? So number 2 on our little journey through GameMaster Growth is, what does success and failure look like on a given knowledge skill? Okay? Success, the way I used to look at it in a very vanilla perspective, is that I used to think, okay, if you succeed at the test, you know the thing. And if you fail the test, you don't know the thing, or maybe even you remember something wrong. And hence we get into the can of worms of, should you roll behind the screen so that the character doesn't know if they recalled correctly? Okay, so I want to level with you here, okay? There are a few things that I know stuff about, okay? And I very rarely get confused about whether I remember something right ways or left ways. If I do, I have an intuition that I'm not sure if it's right or left. You know what I do? I can usually type into Google something very quick to confirm whether I remember it right or not. In other words, it takes a little bit of time. It takes a little added consequence of time to get the correct information. It's not that I didn't have the correct information. It's that because I didn't hit DC 20, I had to spend some extra time. It was obvious that I was looking something up, and I missed, my head was staring at my phone. I was looking at my phone instead of out there in the world, for example. That's a consequence when I don't remember something, in my world. Now, I wonder what just happened. I wonder if we just lost one of my camera here, because no, I guess not. That's kind of interesting, because it's black on the screen for my phone. I'm using OBS Ninja to do camera stuff. Suffice it to say, we had a little thing, and it looks like everything's working in spite of it not looking like it's working. So I'm glad, because the stream can continue. So number 2 was about what failures can look like. Spectacular failure might be something like being painfully obvious. Oh my. Okay, now we're really back. Painfully obvious about that you're really scratching at your knowledge, or you just you come off as an absolute novice, or maybe you don't have you don't know where to look in the first place for the information. You don't know how to type into Google something that will get you the answer. So I don't know. You got me guessing. Like, I don't know what these 2 weapons on this battle mech are. I don't know what's on his shoulder right there. Boy, I haven't the slightest idea. And that can be a consequence. Now, being really way down in the misidentification place, I got to tell you that doesn't. It seems like a sort of a breach of opportunity cost. Like, the player has spent to be better than nothing. They've spent that skill point. The skills are sort of held in, they all cost the same usually in a given RPG, right? And it's almost like having the knowledge skill it made them worse off than if they'd never tried at all. And that seems kind of, I don't know. I'd be very reluctant to set that kind of consequence on a low knowledge roll. What does success look like? Well, you remember the thing, and I talked a little bit about how this could give me a bonus on a diplomacy check. It could even give me a bonus on a tactics check against Pavel Chekhov on the USS Reliant, right? So those are some options that are on the table for what it can mean. There's also just, you don't have to ask around at the bar. You don't have to look around the room and ask somebody. You know ahead of time. You save that turn. Your party is able to approach the situation from a more bird's eye view. You're able to know where to parachute in rather than having to parachute in the woods and scout out the camp. You can actually halo jump onto the roof of the Somali warlord that you are trying to make contact with or steal a precious jewel from, or whatever it may be, for example. So that's what a knowledge skill can do. But I put it to you, remember when I said early on that one of the questions that we have about knowledge skills, number 3 is, what does actually testing the skill look like? What does it mean to actually make a knowledge roll? Now, I think very early on in my life as a game master, I used to think it meant that the character was just like, searching my brain, it's a trivia question. Do I know it or do I not know it? And nowadays, I think about it and I think, boy, based upon the difficulty, based upon how hard this is, what is the context of what kind of knowledge is being sought or what kind of advantage is looking to be gained from the knowledge, you go to the library. You call a professor of something or other, and you know that professor is the expert. And because you are an academic in the field and you've learned yourself, you may even have had contacts with that person, or you know how to approach them because you've seen how they respond to YouTube comments, and you know what the right channel is to approach that person. You actually, knowledge skills can also encompass research. They can mean doing things, not just recalling. And this is an important one for me that I sort of learned. Now, the next thing to talk about is that sometimes knowledge can actually, not exactly bring things into being, but create connections or create meaningful advantages. I just talked about Pavel Chekhov. Well, I'm going to talk to you about a Star Wars game that I played in, that I GM'd. So Ivan was playing a droid, which I think the droid was designated 1V4N. And it was sort of an early model pilot droid that the Empire was working on for, I think, prisoner transports. And it had been emancipated, or maybe was never actually, in a state of fixed programming where he had locked loyalties. Suffice it to say, the questions of how Star Wars droids work and their personhood is outside of the scope of this stream. But the point is that during that droid's lifetime, they had knowledge, they had acquired knowledge, or they'd been programmed with knowledge of the mid-rim of the galaxy. Now, the party was looking for some place to hyperspace jump to refit, repair their shuttle, and be able to return home. They'd kind of hightailed it away from the area of struggle where they were the resistance, they were the rebellion, and the rebellion was just sort of coming into flower in the Five Sisters sector of the galaxy, or rather that system, that planetary system, and they needed to get back there, but they couldn't go directly, if I recall correctly. There's life support problems. There were other issues. So the focus of the campaign was never going to be some supply depot, some asteroid, far away from the Five Sisters. The focus of the campaign was elsewhere. So the question was kind of like, do I know a guy, or do I know what guy to go to get this done? And what can we offer this guy in order to get it done? And you know what? In fact, I did it based upon a successful skill roll, including what's called a triumph, which is a 1 in 12 die on one of the skill dice in Star Wars, Fantasy Flight, Genesis. He knew just the guy. And in fact, he even had leverage over that guy. And I made that guy up. And I think he was a Celestin who I think I called Tio or T-Nex. Maybe it wasn't the best Celestin choice of name. It was something along those lines. And this fella was essentially cut from cloth at the end of that session where the hyper jump had occurred. And then, we knew next session where the party was going. They were going to meet this guy whose name was Tio, and he was going to be able to repair the hyperdrive motivator for their vessel. And that's what it created. Now, I'm not saying that it made up the plot, okay? The party ship needed to be repaired, and the repair was not exactly like the central locus of the game at the time. It was like a shop. And so, there's millions and billions of shops in the Star Wars galaxy. This isn't a setting that, you can map out and know everything about, all the different locations. And the hyperdrives can get you across the entire galaxy in the blink of an eye, in a couple days. Anyway, so scoping, your world building to be able to create it in a fixed fashion is not really, it doesn't jive with the Star Wars genre. So it came down to it, we kind of, as a group, came to agree that the knowledge skill can create, essentially, connections. It can create NPCs, in a sense, or it can declare that there is a favorable NPC in a particular spot. And in some ways, it can even, create a route or a path, in the vastness. Because there's, in every game, in every setting, there is the vast. There's the places that you haven't described, that there's nothing exists about them, okay? Yet. And knowledge, can ask questions about that for sure. But what about what does exist? What about the stuff that you have created as a game master? And this is where we're going to get into some audience questions and some audience engagement here. So let's go over to here, and hopefully this is going to look correct. That's Edie Brickell, but we don't need to know about her. Instead, we want to know about the comments from our viewers. So first, let's look at this one from Eric. How do you feel about the idea that GMs rolling for players in some instances may be in advance of play? But I personally dislike when players can tell how they did from the roll when the character shouldn't know or shouldn't even know that a roll happened. So this is kind of one of these passive recall things, like, do I recognize that something is there? This is an interesting one. And I mean, I'm one to err on the side of assumed competence in the sense of, like, I know that the player has this skill. And from that, I then say that you do have this knowledge. Like, it's in Ubiquity, the RPG that powered the role-playing system rules set that powers Leagues of Adventure, that powers Hallowed Earth Expeditions, and Quantum Black, and a number of games that we've played here on the channel, and that Runeslinger plays pretty frequently over on his channel. In Ubiquity, there's something called taking the average, where if you have a pool of dice, and you say you have 5 dice for a given skill, you can assume that half of them will be successful because the target number is always just half. It's 50%. and that in most situations you can just take the average as a form of sort of assumed competence. And then there's operational descriptions in Ubiquity of what each tier of dice. So it says what 4 successes means a college professor's level of acumen and authority on a topic. In other words, Indiana Jones has a rating of 8 between attribute and skill with archaeology, for example. That's sort of what Ubiquity can tell you. And by the same token, taking 10 and taking 20 in this old animal right here, which is my 3.5 handbook, which we're going to be talking about this one a little bit because there's some interesting stuff. In the stealth episode, I'm going to talk about a peculiar malaise of how players go about playing the game, what the words come out of their mouth as they're trying to sneak around or do things. It's a pet peeve of mine, but that's for another video. Suffice it to say, in this book right here, there are other ways to assume a particular role when a character is not under pressure. So, say your starship has been dispatched to the Margolis system, and you are an authority, a social scientist authority, aboard your vessel, and a kind of a political analyst of sorts aboard your Star Trek spaceship. And there's a hostage situation in the Margolis system. And racing at warp 6, or just a regular speed, you got days to prepare. So you do. And so, you are able to use the library computer to get, you have duty shifts that are not going to be on camera, basically, essentially. And as the game master, I can give to your character and to you the basic knowledge that, you were going to be able to acquire by using your proficiency with Starfleet databases, knowing how to dig, knowing how to summarize and operationalize knowledge, right? That's what an expert can do, especially when it's in this off-camera moment. So I like the idea of trying to predict instances when the PCs might have unequal information relevant to a scene and rolling for it in advance and having typed up descriptions ready to send to players when they come up. So that last bit I really like when it comes to Star Trek is that, we did a scan and then I'm able to send you basically an index card of what's in the basic level of the scan. And, if the group's preference is such, then, if people like that sort of thing at your table, then somebody has the opportunity to say, Captain, sensors are indicating a positronic field at the 7,000 Cochrane level. And, I can have a little note in unspoken text about what 7,000 Cochranes means for a positronic field, as far as, like what the ship can handle, what kind of outcomes that could generate, like under normal circumstances, what precautions are normally taken. I can pack that all into this little slip based upon, an assumed success with that. Now, if I'm going to go to the effort of typing that stuff up, I mean, personally, from my perspective, it's stuff that I affirmatively would like to, I don't want to waste the effort of doing it if it's not going to be used. From the player perspective, I'm not saying I wouldn't prepare that information ahead of time and have it fixed and existing in the world, because that is my preference usually, is to do this thing called objective reality in game mastering, where things actually exist before the players see them, and NPCs have their own agenda and consciousness, which, I hear there's a lot of game masters who don't look at things that way, which is fine. That's a style. Okay. I'm just talking about how I've grown within my style. And I would say that, I would be reluctant to create all that information as far as not only work, but, prejudicing it to a particular point of view. If I don't know what character knows it and that they're going to know it when the situation arises, if it really is more uncertain and it needs to be a die roll rather than an assumed affirmative competence, like we talked about with taking 10, taking 20, etc. If it needs to be that sort of thing, I'm not sure I'd write it down, because I just, I would feel like there's a potential for like favoritism in some ways that like, oh, you're kind of telling me this in the voice of like Borgar the barbarian, even though it was Nimrida the archer. And so, for me, like, I did this, my spoken voice as a game master is very different than my written voice of like, here's a handout. And the way that I compose those things, I practice more fairness, and I practice more like sort of POV connection between me and the character and me and the player. I just have more practice with that when I'm in the moment and I'm looking at that person and I know who it is. Plus, a lot of the time I don't know who's going to show up to my game. That's the other thing about it, is that not knowing who's going to show up, who's not going to show up this week, I just, that's not a sort of thing that I would do personally. So I just like assume they take 10. That's how I go about it. Okay. Patrick Bernard says, your style is very personal, but relaxed and thoughtful like Mr. Rogers. Well, thank you. I'm working on it. It's taken a long way to get here. And yeah, I've started to realize that maybe this is the place where I can connect the most with the audience and I can be of the most value. And, let's be honest, YouTube is all about creating like a squad of people who are your biggest fans and that, want to see you succeed and grow and be able to spend more time doing the thing because it becomes more successful, which, includes, sponsorships and ads and subscribers and stuff because it's real life. And, I'm trying to do this very well, which, is different than doing it casually. And so I just want to take this moment that if you like this video, slam that like button. If you think that there are questions that someone in your life might be able to ask about skills or that you have something to learn, and so on, something you learned from this talk already, then, it would be cool if you shared it. In a way that the social media algorithms won't, squelch your post, which is outside of the scope of this video. But suffice it to say, the biggest way that you can help is by helping me reach new audiences, because this is a whole new kind of show for me here on the channel, and I'd like people to hear about it. Anywho, rest of Patrick's comment. Love to hear more about character knowledge checks. I went from Pathfinder roll to know anything to the into the odd, just tell them anything they ask, but I don't have a cohesive mental framework to go further with my understanding. Well, I think one of the things that I talked about as far as like a mental framework is that ladder of difficulties. Thinking to yourself about, okay, if the character takes 10, we could say that like that's without Google or without a trip to the library. That's what taking 10 looks like. So this is what the character knows. Is, their modifier, in D20 type systems, your intelligence bonus plus your skill ranks. So say they can hit a 21 with that. So that's kind of what they know offhand for me. And, a 20 is taking 20. That would be what they know with a trip to the library, with a phone call to an authority on the subject, sending someone a DM who's, known to be helpful, and you happen to know how to appeal to people because you are a practitioner of knowledge. You know how to reach out to them to get that. So that's what taking the 20 says as far as like, what do they know? So like, what do you tell them? And, I think that because we are also practiced in our day-to-day lives with like reaching out for information that's just outside of our scope, like I want to know more about this particular camera. What is how long's the warranty? Are people satisfied with its autofocus system? And, I know how to do that. I can go and look at different YouTube videos. I have a sensation. I've started to learn, okay, which kind of camera YouTubers are shilling and which kind of camera YouTubers tend to be more impartial and, drill down into, is this actually good? And, I've gotten that because I've kind of started doing legwork and cultivating that as a skill. And so that's what taking 20 does is about, okay, so now I can hit like a 31. So this is the kind of knowledge that the character can access from that. What can be achieved with that knowledge is one of the things that you'll need to make calls about as the game master, as far as like what kind of advantage that knowledge can realize. What can knowledge do at the tabletop? I'm in favor of being affirmative about it. That a successful roll basically translates into an opportunity, or it saves an opportunity cost that would have to be paid otherwise. So, an example of that is like Charm Animal, the druid spell in good old Dungeons and Dragons, right? So if there are wolves on the trail and you cast Charm Animal, then there's no more wolf encounter, and you may actually get some information about like what the wilderness ahead is like. And you're going to get an increase. You're going to get some stuff. So first of all, you save that time of maybe having to rest a day from that wolf encounter, and then you also save the spell slots and you save the spent resources. You don't make a lot of noise having a fight, which might alert the hill giant that's over the hill. So those are the sorts of cumulative benefits which can come from a Charm Animal spell. So by the same token, somebody spent some character points or some sort of opportunity cost was paid to be knowledgeable as a character. Even in this game, where there are no skills, and assumed competence is one of the ways that people play it, you still pay the opportunity cost of having the magic user's rubric of leveling up. You're going to level up slower than if you were a fighter or a cleric. So, you're the guy who knows stuff in Holmes D&D, right? Well, what does that get you besides spell slots, which are, a pretty meager compensation? Well, I would put it to you that that's one of the things you get. Okay, so let's move on. Let's get back to the comments section. I know that was messy. I'm sorry, folks. The last viewer comment before we'll go and look at Stream Chat is from Andrew Merrington. Would my character know X? When X is a key component of the setting from a player perspective, which they may or may not be a secret in the world. Like, would my character know the names of the Chaos Gods in Warhammer? Or would my character know about the Guardian Forever in Star Trek? Should these be skill rolls? GM judgment calls, both or neither? So I'm going to put it right there in the middle, which is to say, or both and neither, in the sense of like, I kind of sketched out my assumed competence, like let it be a take 10, let it be a take 20, as far as assumed knowledge. And then also, I think it's worthy of kind of thinking, rather than having a conversation with a player where you explain, no, your character doesn't know that, even though you do. I would be inclined towards something along the lines of, let's imagine why your character doesn't know this, and what they do know. Like, what beliefs do they hold in ignorance, or why are they content in ignorance? Those are the sorts of questions that I would ask the player, coming back. And that I would contemplate also. I contemplate some answers about like why don't you know this, and why don't other people know? How do you get by not knowing this? And also another part of that is communicating why the secret is kept. Is another way of looking at it. Yeah. So as far as like, does my character know about the Guardian Forever? I think one thing to think about is like the general versus specific. So is the general really all that different than the specific? So for the Chaos Gods, I think if you utter the name of them, there's a Cthulhu type thing going on where like if you say their name, like you can like cause them to appear, or like gobbledygook can start happening. So that's a actual arcane like advantage in some ways, or that's a that gives you stuff. And so I would be inclined to say that probably would be a die roll, or one of those die rolls that isn't a die roll, where we kind of check what the skill rating is. Do I know about the Guardian of Forever specifically? But what I do know, as the game master in a Star Trek, is that time portals and time travel and time anomalies exist. And not only that, we exist, they exist and they're acknowledged by the setting. To the point where when the USS Defiant goes back in time, we know that there was an investigation. A couple guys show up on Deep Space Nine to ask a lot of questions. There are standard operating procedures which competent Star Trek officers are able to they're aware of the procedures, even if they don't heed them, and they know what's informing why those procedures exist. There's a training video that at some point they had to watch. You can think of it that way, that told them what the company policy was, at the very least. So do I know about the Guardian Forever? Maybe not, but I know that there are time portals. I know what the consequences of them are. I maybe even know how to look for a time portal. And I know where the restricted section of the library is to look for, where are the time incidents, that nobody will tell me about. All right. I might have that knowledge of who's the cop that is making sure I don't look up, when's the next time incident? When's my next opportunity to go back in time? And there's some guy in the Star Trek universe who's trying to make sure that you don't find out when that next window is, because he's protecting the timeline. Those are the sorts of advantage. That's what the character kind of knows by default. And, do you know about the Guardian Forever? I mean, it's 6 of one or half a dozen of the other. I mean, because people so rarely go back to the Guardian of Forever in particular. And instead, it's sort of a MacGuffin, the time portals and so on. And yeah, that's what I would say, is that does your character know about this stuff? Basically, the answer is yes, and it might be informed by a character role in Star Trek Adventures. Like, are they the captain? Are they the science officer? What did they do aboard the ship, right? And so, we already have an example that there's affirmative powers that are granted to those characters from their roles. So, the science officer can do X. The engineer has the advantage of the engineering department. And, we can stretch that out to say that there's also some affirmative stuff about that. The characters are not just people in Star Trek. They are specific people. They are the bridge crew of a hero ship on a Star Trek TV show. So, and I think that that's one of the ways to kind of decide along that list of, is it a skill check? Is it a GM judgment call? Is it both? Is it neither? And, I guess at the end of the day, my answer is basically, I try to read the rules very carefully and decide how to do it. And usually that means that the answer is neither. Either they know or they don't, based on what the rules are telling me about who the characters are, what a skill is, when do skill checks arise? When are they challenging versus when are they trivial and they just happen? And through that, the game is kind of telling me what kind of game it is and whether they should or shouldn't. Because I am a person who plays each RPG as its own thing and I try to be informed, like paths in a garden, to borrow a term that I just learned, that the rules are like paths in a garden. And I'm informed by each particular game. And in spite of this GameMaster Growth series being sort of a system agnostic one, I'm still going to teach that, I'm informed by the particular games. And I can tell you about the different approaches that different games have. So, I think it's about time that I went over and I looked at Stream Chat, which, you know what, it's going to be a little messy because I don't have that set up to be super fancy in our stream. But nevertheless, we're going to do it. Here we go. Let's drag it over here and let's see. Oh, who's there to say hi? Oh, well, that stinks. For whatever reason, this was an unlisted stream. And you'll all get to watch it in a little bit. Shame. Hope you have a good night. Anyway, this is a series, and I do have a question for everyone who's going to be stumbling upon this video later, which is, let me know how you feel about rebranding the channel as GameMaster Growth. I'm still the Complex Games apologist, and this is still, I'm still Antoine, this character, but I want to make sure that people can identify when they see my videos that it is the sort of thing that they want to click on, as opposed to the sort of thing that's not for them. And part of that is kind of changing the visuals and changing the name of the brand. So have a great afternoon, folks. This might be one of those ones that I actually download and edit. It's not going to look great, unfortunately, because I just streamed it in 1280, but maybe it'll go that way. In any case, I hope you have a great afternoon.